Okay, hi everybody. My name is Helen Hou-Sandí, and I'm going to be talking about tailoring the admin of the WordPress admin to clients and their particular workflows. So I'll be looking at some practical examples, like actually playing with their sites in local development, and just don't tell them that I was showing you that. And then giving some practical code examples. Most of the code examples come straight from my WordCamp New York talk last June. So I don't think I saw many of you there, so hopefully it's not just repeating myself, but I'll go through those as well. So a little bit about me. I'm the Director of User Interface Engineering with 10up. We're a WordPress-only agency. I think we might be the biggest one. We've got like 23, 24 people now. What I do is a lot of stuff. I do a lot of internal code review, things that a director should be doing. Going to see clients here in the city, that sort of thing. I also, sort of oversee like how we do exactly this, tailoring the admin to our clients, giving them a really, really good and meaningful experience when they're managing their content. So I'm a developer. Pretty much that's what I am. I'm a developer. I'm at Helen Hou-Sandi on Twitter. I think I talk about WordPress, or I talk to Boone about Minesweeper. Yeah, that's what we do. I'm also a guest committer to WordPress core. For this cycle, I am the feature lead for post formats. We've been calling it post formats UI, although it's not really UI at all. It's more like structured metadata and theme compatibility and that kind of stuff, which I think has taken some people off guard because they're expecting big sweeping UI changes, and I haven't made any big sweeping UI changes yet. So that's kind of fun. I'm also a musician. I have my bachelor's and master's in piano. It's not computer related at all. And I still perform sometimes, although not right now. Okay, so one of the core WordPress tenets is decisions, not options, right? We hear it all the time, like make decisions for people. Don't just give them options, because sometimes options just create overload. They don't create a feeling of comfort. It just makes you feel like you have to do something to tailor your environment to you. We use this same philosophy with our clients. We make decisions on their behalf. Of course we talk to them, interview them, do stakeholder interviews and that sort of thing. But we make sure that we've made decisions for them so that they have a consistent and comfortable experience when working in WordPress with their content. It's one of those things that WordPress gets criticized a lot for, and I think rightfully in a lot of ways. WordPress has gotten really complex, and it tries to be a lot of things all at the same time. In some ways, it's great. It means we can make WordPress whatever we want it to be, right? And that's why so many of us become WordPress developers, because it does all these different things for us. But at the same time, that just means we've added layers of complexity, and the UI, the interface, reflects that in WordPress. So a huge part of what we do is we strip down the interface. We remove stuff that's not relevant to what the client is doing. Removing menu items, removing metaboxes, or just removing stuff that they don't need anymore. So again, we're making decisions on their behalf, not giving them every single thing to look at when they're looking at the screen. Okay, so my first 3 case studies, I'm calling them case studies, I don't know what you want to call them. They come from the same client, a client here in the city. You might be able to figure out who it is, but I'm not supposed to say who they are. So the first thing that they wanted, this client, it's a fashion brand, and they're very focused on ease of use. Their editorial team is not great all the time at editing content. They get very skittish about things, and they really want to have heavily visual previews of everything, because it's a fashion brand. That's what they rely on is the visual of their site. So one of the first things that they wanted was the ability to preview what their homepage was going to look like. If you've ever had to deal with staging and development and production environments all together, staging content is like the worst thing that's ever happened, especially in WordPress. There's just a lot of stuff that goes, absolute URLs, all that kind of stuff. There are definitely tools out there. I've seen, like, Crowd Favorite has a tool called Ramp that does content staging that pushes to production. I've never used it. I've heard good things about it. But we didn't want to build like a custom thing for them to do this. And they're also hosted on WordPress.com VIP. So it would mean having a second WordPress.com VIP site as their staging, or trying to replicate that environment on our staging server, neither of which sounded awesome. So what we wanted to do is give them a visual preview of what they have this grid on the homepage. We wanted to give them a visual preview of that without actually building a staging tool. So what we ended up with, it's pretty JavaScript heavy. So what they have is they have a bunch of layouts, and I apparently am focused on that. Okay, so they have a bunch of layouts, and we managed to split it up into left side and right side, even though when you're looking at it as a reader or editor, you don't really have two different sides looking at it. But in order to simplify the picker so it's not like 25 options, we split it into sides. And they have these. So they have like a 1-up, a large image, 2, a couple of 3s, and 4 for each side. And what they can do is they can select a layout for each side, and then they can select a post to go in there. This select post thing is really, really basic because for their purposes, they're pretty much only putting recent posts into there. So we don't need to like add search or any of that stuff. For some clients, they might be adding really old material. We don't know. But for this particular client, they didn't need to be searching for what they wanted. It was going to be within the last 5 or 10 posts. So we just left this simple. Gave them a preview of the thumbnail, and then they can select it, and it populates it. And this is all just JavaScript. It has not changed anything on the front. Nothing on the front changes until they save their changes. And once the changes are saved, I'm not logged in, so it's going to do that to me. But once the changes are saved, it'll reflect on the homepage. But they can sit there and play with it until they feel ready to actually publish it. There are a lot of things this screen doesn't do that other clients might want to do. Their team is very small, so we don't have problems like concurrency. There's only one person editing this at one time. If they had like a bigger team or multiple people doing this, we'd institute like a lock kind of thing, like the way you see on the edit screen where it says so-and-so is currently editing this. That's something that we would have implemented here. And the other thing that's not implemented here is versions of this grid. But that actually would have been, I want to say, relatively easy. In this case, we're basically storing which layout is on each side, and then which post ID goes into each slot. So it's just an array of numbers. And that's stored in the options table. If we had wanted to do like revisions of the homepage, we would have made this a custom post type. And then each time that they wanted to save it, just saved a new post. And that way they could revert to an old one if they wanted, or something else like that. So that was their homepage grid manager. And then the next thing that they wanted, again, fashion brand and products. So they wanted to be able to link to their products if they were in an image. They have like sliders and featured images and that kind of thing. So they wanted to be able to add hotspots to these images. So a hotspot is associated with what? Coordinates, right, on an image, and a URL in their case. There's no text involved. So we then built this. To get here, this is actually coming from the media library. So there's a link that says manage this image's hotspots. And so it takes you to this screen. And what they can do is exactly that. You can add a hotspot and click to place it wherever you want. And then add the product URL. And then it shows them the coordinates. We could have hidden that, but they seem to like knowing exactly where it was, so we left it. That normally would be something that I would hide, but they liked it. So in this case, it highlights which one they're currently editing and allows them to enter a product URL, and then they can remove it, or they can switch which one they're editing. So now they want to edit this one and move it around. So this was another neat thing that we did, very visual management of image hotspots. for products. And in this case, because these are associated with images, right, which are attachments, which are a post type in WordPress, this is actually stored as post meta on the attachment itself. So that's what that does. And actually, these fields that you see are literally the post meta that gets saved with the coordinates. OK, and then this was also something I talked about at WordCamp. They also needed multiple post thumbnails. And later in my presentation, I actually have videos embedded so that if you go back to my slides later, you can kind of watch them. With this site, they have a lot of different image sizes and orientations across the site. So they're using square thumbnails for archives, a really wide landscape format for homepage slider, a taller landscape format for sliders within the post itself, or you could choose a portrait-sized image. And if we go back to this homepage grid, you can see there are actually two different image orientations. There's that really wide landscape one. There's actually three. There's this really wide landscape one. There's this tall portrait one. And then there's a taller landscape one. So they actually had 4 different image orientations going on. And because they're a fashion brand, we had to allow them to specify the specific image that they wanted for each size, if they wanted to, with a fallback all the way back to the square thumbnail. And the biggest reason for this is because if you're talking about models and your main image is a portrait one, but then you've put it into a landscape slot, you've got a headless model, right? Like that's like a really bad idea. So, and again, very, very visually oriented client. So what we ended up doing was in the post editor, so everything is pretty normal. Like this site was pretty basic. Like it's a blog. So they're just content. They've got like a short title and deck. We give them just like a character counter because they have like really, really anal layout needs. Like they treat it like a print publication. It's really funny. But we give them like character counters, so that kind of thing. But what we really built here was a box to manage post thumbnails. So behind the scenes, we're using a plugin called Multiple Post Thumbnails, which is basically just a class that gives you some helper functions that resemble cores, like the post thumbnail, that sort of thing. So we're using that plugin behind the scenes just to give us helper functions. But beyond that, we've built like a custom UI for it. So what we ended up here was with these 4, they're 4. I think there might be 5 now. These 4 different image orientations, and they have the ability to select a different image for each one of these. This was built before 3.5, and they haven't updated since. They haven't wanted us to do anything since. So, we're still in the old media. But if you look at the old media, I don't know if you remember what media usually looks like, but there's like a bunch of stuff down here for gallery, like gallery settings. Totally irrelevant when you're just trying to pick a picture. And then in the media library, when you show an image, I'm trying to pick a portrait. Yeah. So when you show an image, instead of showing you all the settings for that image, like title, caption, blah, 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 and like set as featured image and all this other stuff, we've hidden all of that. It's not actually removed, it's just hidden. And then change this button to be select image. So if you click select image, it pops it into place here. And there was one other advantage we discovered after going this route, which is that before 3.5, setting the post thumbnail would set it live on the site because it was saved over Ajax. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but you could remove the featured image and that would affect your live site, even though all you're doing is editing your post and you haven't actually updated it yet. That was super frustrating for a lot of people, and especially this client. So in going this route, we don't save this over Ajax. This doesn't get saved until they hit update or publish post. So that ended up also being a really, really good thing for them. OK. Now I'm going to talk some more about customizing the edit screen itself. The edit screen is great, sort of, maybe. It comes with a lot of stuff that maybe we don't need. Like the custom fields metabox is available. It's hidden by default now, I think. But just the fact that these things are available is like, I don't know why. Like there's really no reason. And sometimes we get into post types that don't actually need a visual editor at all. Like there's just no need for it. So in this case, we've got a really simple editing form. This is an internal tool that we have. We're working on estimating time. So we don't need a visual editor. Like we're not putting pictures in our time estimates because that would be really silly. So what we've got is this project picker. I probably shouldn't actually show you that. So we've got this project picker. You can know about 9 to 5. And this is actually powered by a JavaScript helper. In this case, we're using the jQuery version called Chosen, which makes selects much, much friendlier to use. So like you can search through it to find the project because we have a lot of them. This is actually a custom taxonomy, and it pulls on a cron job from Basecamp. So these are projects coming in from Basecamp for us so that we don't have to like sit there and enter project names because that would be also really stupid and duplicated effort. We have a date picker. So for us, it's just the week of. So you're only able to choose Sundays, whatever the beginning of the week is for you. How many hours? Is this a critical or immovable amount of time that you have to accomplish that week? And then any notes that you want to leave for yourself. That's all we needed. So we just, this post type doesn't support the editor, doesn't support thumbnails, doesn't support a lot of things. It just is, right? It doesn't, I don't think it even supports revisions because if you're revising, then you've done something wrong, I think. What it does support is this author metabox. I don't think you can turn the support on and off. I'm not really sure. But we relabeled it to be employee because that way you can actually assign time to somebody else. So somebody like me overseeing a project, I could say, you're doing 8 hours on this project this week. Congratulations. Here you go. So that's a really, really simple edit form that we're using. And I'll talk about like the hooks that we use to put this in there, because as you can see, it's not in a metabox like a lot of things that you traditionally would have put on the edit screen, right? They go into metaboxes that go like on the side or in the main area. This is not in any metaboxes. Okay, and then I'm going to talk some more about that. I guess fields outside of metabox areas. In this case, this is a site with company and people profiles. I think it launched, so I'm not going to be too worried about whether or not you figure out who this is. But what we have here is there's actually vestiges of your typical edit screen here, right? You've got the title and the editor. Those are normal things. But as you can see, there's stuff that appears between them. And this is, some of it is because of the way their actual front end is laid out. So to their editors, it makes sense to have the back end form reflect what the front end editor looks like, right? So this material up here comes before what's down here. And especially in this case, we're using the content as an overview. On the front end, it's got a tabbed interface where it has like overview, news, people, competitors, and financial data for this company. So what's actually happening is that all of those separate tabs, those are rewrite rules for the company, but it's all managed on one screen. So they don't have to go like manage financial data for one company in one place and then manage the people for that company in another place. It's all on one screen. So we've got fields between the title and the editor. And then we've got fields after the editor. And these fields are neat. They're repeatable and sortable. So this is tabular data. So we represent it as a table. What you can do is you can obviously remove them. You can add a row, and you can drag them around and resort. And this is some more post-meta that we save. And then on the front, like it just looks like that. If you want to see, this is financial data. We're pulling stuff in from Yahoo, I think, for ticker charts. And then down here, this is that table, so that tabular data that they entered in the back It makes more sense with actual numbers. I don't think it makes sense like this. So other things, other tabs that you see up here, like news, people, and competitors, those are managed in a couple of different ways. So here we've got some content sources. So we end up with a ticker symbol, which does the ticker thing. And then a feed URL. There's some other fallbacks and stuff for it. But basically, it just pings whatever feed you've specified and pulls that into the news tab for that company. Here we get company logo. I'll also be talking about this. This is the featured image metabox, right? Post thumbnail. But it's been relabeled. And the other thing is that the title of the modal and the button down here, the select button, those have also been relabeled to let the person know like what they're doing. So we use built-in WordPress functionality for post thumbnail, but to the client, it's the company logo. It's not featured image because that doesn't mean anything in the context of a company. And then we're using a plugin for people and competitors. We're using a plugin called Post to Post, which is just, I don't know, it's fantastic. It's a many-to-many post relationships manager, which basically just means that we're relating people, which is another post type, to companies, and we're relating other companies to this company without trying to use taxonomies or something complicated like that. It's just like this. And that's what we use on the front end to gather that data and be able to output it. So in this case, we have one person connected to this company. So I think I only have one of each in this local install. And then here it gives you that person. It grabs all the connected data and outputs that for you on the front. And the other really cool thing that happened with this site, which is not related to the workflow, but this was an existing site like on a custom application with a custom database. So I didn't do this, somebody else did, but she wrote a WP CLI script to scrape the stuff from their old database and bring it into WordPress, create all the connections programmatically, and all that kind of stuff. So that was really cool. It was tough. I think we messed it up like 5 or 6 times, you know. So then you have to like erase all 110,000 records and start over again. But you know, in the end, it worked out. So that was pretty cool, like not having to make the client enter everything all over again or worry about like how these relationships are going to be repopulated on this site. We did a lot of, you know, regex and fun things to create these relationships again. Okay, and then I'm going to talk some more about integrating with plugins. What you saw was Post to Post. That was one of them. This is another client, Learning Works for Kids. I really like this site a lot. It's about relating video games to learning skills and disabilities for children. So they have these things called playbooks, which are like explanatory about like what kinds of skills playing a game works on for your kid, whether or not it does, right? So like something like Angry Birds, what does it do for your kid? Like, is it focus or, I mean, like the physics, right? Like prediction of where this bird is gonna go. I don't know, stuff like that. So I always thought it was kind of neat. And they have a lot going on. Their edit interface is a little bit cluttered. And this is the nature of this site. And also, they liked it that way. So again, it's about the client. They said, no, we like having everything available, visible all the time. Yeah, go for it. You know, put everything on the screen. We just want to see it. Don't try to simplify it too much for us. So they're using a plugin for these notes. So we had to turn them on for this custom post type. They've got a checkbox here, which says free for non-members. So that's a piece of meta, and that's something we added. And then they have, going down the side, you see, you know, the typical category, excerpt, whatever. They have this thing called a learning quotient. This is a custom metabox. They have taxonomies. They have a ton of taxonomies. And as you can imagine, like looking at the categories metabox, if you have that metabox times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 taxonomies, that's going to take like the rest of forever to show on the screen. And managing it becomes unmanageable because the screen has just become so long. And they're never choosing like 100 different terms in that taxonomy. So again, we use chosen to consolidate this, and we give them a much easier to use interface. It's almost like tagging. But in this case, they can't add terms, which is fine for this site. And again, it's a client thing because they don't add terms almost ever. For them, it's a very deliberate thing to be adding a learning skill, right? They start the site with a set of learning skills. So not being able to add is actually for the best, because then you don't have an intern who's made a typo in a term. So we have thinking skills, academic skills, all this stuff. And then we have a slider here for age range. This is actually also a taxonomy where there are ages from 0 to 14 plus. And we represent it here as a slider because that's what conceptually makes sense. And then when we're doing the save routine, we go through and we set the object terms for this playbook. So we set the terms in that taxonomy to represent all of the ages within that slider's range. So that's kind of a neat thing that we did for them. Yeah, and then a bunch of revisions. And then in the middle area, when we started this site, it was, I had just started with 10up. I think it was my first project. And it was a very tight deadline and budget, which happens. So we initially chose to use a plugin. In some ways, it was really great because it made a lot of things really easy to develop and really fast. In some ways, it sucks because then you're married to that plugin, right, forever and ever and ever for this client. But I think for them, it works out. And in this case, this is the Advanced Custom Fields plugin. If you've ever used it, it's actually a really nice plugin. So I don't have a problem with it. But we have a bunch of things like, is this free? Is it paid? Meaning versions of it. Ratings, requirements, a link to buy now or play now. And then we get into this area, which is kind of intense because they have like a tabbed output on the front end. So we have basically an editor for every single tab that they have. And some of them are customizable in terms of both the title and the content. So some of them, it's supposed to be how it helps, right? So this is guided for them, so they know what to put in there. But then later, we get into the title for the tab 5, and then the content for tab 5, and then it used to have a default, so that kind of thing. So that goes all the way down. And again, you can see the screen gets really long, but they said they liked it that way. They liked being able to just scroll up and down to edit rather than us giving them like tabs on the back end to edit or whatever. They happened to like it this way, so we left it that way. And then on the front, if it'll load, you get this. So there's a lot going on with this site. As you can tell, there's like membership components and bbPress and all kinds of stuff. But this is basically what you get. You get this tabbed interface for all that content that they entered. You can go through the tabs like that or up here. And then the other thing, the reason why they have so many taxonomies is because of this membership component. For each member, like you have children of your member, and these children can take assessments that tell you what kind of skills they need help with. So all of these taxonomies that are used for the playbooks end up giving personalized recommendations to the user and that particular child user. So there's just a lot going on, which is why it's so complex in the back end. But we gave them everything that they needed without it becoming a burden to edit. And we also use Mark Jakewith's WP Help plugin to give them some documentation in the back end, and also allow their administrator to create documentation on the back end, because they do employ like interns and that kind of thing to do editing. Okay, so the meat of what I've been talking about has been custom content types, or custom post types, as you probably know them. But I prefer to call them custom content types and post meta. And that's the majority of the extra data that we use to give our clients like a structured way of managing their data. So this is all, again, this is a lot of stuff from WordCamp. But there's some details around the admin screen that some people don't pay attention to, that kind of pet peeves of mine and 10up in general, maybe because of me, I don't know. So the first thing is post type icons. There are two sets. two versions in core, right? There's a 32 pixel one on the edit and add screens, right? So the list of all your whatever and the editing or adding your whatever. And then there's a 16 pixel version for the menu itself. And typically you'd say, like, when you're registering your post type, it gets a menu icon, so that goes in the admin menu. And then you get a screen icon, which requires you to inject CSS, which is not super cool, but that's what it is. So you get to inject some CSS to give it this image. And one thing to note is that this add, edit, the 32 pixel one is black and white in core right now, or tinted blue if you use the blue theme, but it's monochrome. Now for the admin menu, if you use this argument, you just get one image, right? And it's like literally an image tag in it. So you usually get a bunch of plugins or whatever that have added colored icons to your admin menu. But the admin menu is black and white unless you're hovering or in that menu itself. And then it turns to color. So a better thing to do is to create a CSS sprite. And a sprite is really important because otherwise you get like a load lag when you hover over it, and then you don't have an icon for a moment, which is really weird. And then you just, again, you inject some CSS to create the hover effect. And this CSS goes everywhere in the admin. In the previous case, the CSS only needs to appear in some places, those two spots, editing and listing that post type, right? Because that icon's not used anywhere else. So it's okay to put it everywhere, but I like to keep stuff out of screens that it doesn't need to be in. But in this case, the admin menu shows everywhere. So the CSS needs to be injected everywhere. Okay, this is an example of, let's say, a slide custom post type. So a custom post type that only needs an image as its content. We use it a lot for stuff like homepage sliders on client sites. So in this case, these are old screenshots, but all we've got is this featured image metabox. And you can see, again, it's been relabeled and it's been moved to the center. So metabox positions in core, like when you drag them around, they're saved as a user option, right? So like a user preference, basically, which means that anytime by default somebody logs in to edit this, that box is going to be on the side, right? Because that's where the featured image metabox is. It looks pretty stupid. Like, I mean, that's what it looks like. So it's kind of lame, right, to go in and there's like nothing in the main area, so you don't really know what you're supposed to be editing. There's no real flow to editing because you get published first, and then the featured image. So then your sense of the flow of editing this content type is totally thrown off. So what we can do is move it programmatically for everybody into the center area by default. They can still drag it around, but by default we can put it in the middle. In this case, you can see for register post type, all it supports is a thumbnail. That's all it's got. So the way we do this is we do a few things here. The first thing we do is we remove the original metabox, and then we add it back. So the adding a metabox takes the callback function, which is a public function in core. So you can just call that function to reprint the metabox, but in the main area. So normal instead of side. And then we just do some cheap string replace for set featured image and remove featured image. And that's it. And then for media strings, this is like it's output in JavaScript, so it's an object. So you just filter these strings. So the ones for set featured image title and set featured image. So you filter those based on which post type you're on. And then we get into what this does to the list table. So this is what the list table would look like by default because there are no titles, right? So we don't have title support, so it doesn't know how to make a title, and we haven't done anything to make a title. So it gives you this thing that says auto draft, which is really lame, and they don't know what that means. So what we do is we alter the list table so that it shows you the slide image and then gives you those edit and trash links underneath. It doesn't support like quick edit in this instance because like there's nothing to quick edit. So this is what we've done to the list table. There's some things that we have to do. So this is some code. Again, these slides are online, so you can copy paste to your heart's content. But basically what we do is we replace the columns. So instead of it being, title and date, we just replace it with the first checkbox, which you need for bulk actions if you want them, and then a column for the thumbnail. And then we handle that custom column by determining, what we should do. So if it has a thumbnail, we put out the thumbnail, and if it doesn't, then we say there's no image, which would be really weird to have a slide post that doesn't have an image. And then what we do underneath is, this is basically ripped straight out of core. These are the row actions for each post. So, do you want to edit or trash it? And that's what that does. Because those row actions are tied to the title column, and you can't tell core where to put them. It's one of those beefs that I have with core, is that you can't tell core which column it should put the row actions in. So we have to kind of replicate them. Maybe someday I'll get around to proposing a better way to do it, but not right now. Another thing, this was just a quick example of the Datepicker for jQuery UI. So all jQuery UI components are available and registered in core. So you don't have to download jQuery UI's JS files and include them. What core doesn't include is it doesn't include CSS. So without the CSS, it doesn't look like anything, or it looks like total garbage. So I have a GitHub repo with some CSS. I would love to keep working on it. There's some things that I feel like could look even more WordPressy and less like smoothness, which is basically what that looks like. And I have a track ticket open, which is now like 5,000 tickets old, for jQuery UI CSS in core itself. Again, this is just, I think it's more something that just needs bodies on it, because I'm just one person. But yeah, so we do this. One of the things that I like to do is I like to store it as year, month, date, not a timestamp. Some people convert it to a timestamp when saving it. It all depends on how you need to use it later. In my case, this is fine. It sorts as a string correctly, which probably isn't great, but it's also like the MySQL date format, so you can cast it if you really want to be like that. So this is basic code for putting the Datepicker in the metabox. This is how you enqueue the script. Again, really easy. You don't have to do anything because it's in core. All the components of jQuery UI are prefixed with jQuery-UI-, and then the name of the component. So everything, autocomplete, widgets, all that kind of stuff. And they each have the dependencies because jQuery UI, so the Datepicker is dependent on the widget component. So each of these is actually registered with the correct components associated with it. So you don't have to worry about registering each component that component needs to function. And then you just initialize it. I'm lazy. I put the script right in line, and then your input. One thing I wanted to note is that I don't think there are any examples of save routines for this meta in my slides. This is sort of assuming that you know how to handle saving metadata, and there's a whole other discussion to be had about validating and sanitizing your data, which I can't fit all together. So here we get a list table with a custom sortable column. What I was talking about with the date format is because I wanted to be able to sort it, because it was really important to me to be able to view the latest. So this is, again, code. You give it a new column, and then same old thing, how you output the column. And then you make the column sortable by adding it to the array of sortable columns. And then you add code that checks to see if the user has clicked that header. Basically, it'll be in the URL, and then alter the query, the request, based on that. Okay, and then I have these two videos. I showed you the multiple post thumbnails thing already, although I'll show you what it was before. There were 4 metaboxes down the side, and you would choose it. You're like, I don't know where to go. I guess I'll go to gallery. Maybe there's all this stuff. Oh my God, I don't know what I'm supposed to click. Where was I even coming from? This one adds a link for every single size. So then, Where did I even come from? I don't know. I'm just going to guess. Maybe I was going for a portrait one. That's, I think, what I remember clicking on. And then it doesn't close, which is my least favorite thing about how this used to work. So then you're just sitting there like, I don't know what the hell just happened. And then it sets it, finally. And again, saves over Ajax, so it's just made this live on your site. So that was super frustrating. And I'll just move on from that. But I showed you what we ended up doing, consolidating all the metaboxes into one, creating an actual workflow for the user that made sense. So this is code for that, the old style thick box. So I'm just going to skip through those. So that's blah, blah. So, well, you get the metabox itself, JavaScript on the editing screen, cleaning up the thick box, like removing all those fields that you don't need to see and making the button say select image instead of insert into post. And then what do you do to get that image to insert from the thick box instead of inserting it into the post itself? So there's all that stuff. But now with the new media modal as of 3.5, this is actually, I find it to be much easier. You're looking at JavaScript, and it does sort of assume a little bit of knowledge of Backbone, which is what powers the modal. But you can see there's a lot less code going on. They're not 4 components. So what we get here is, this is actually repurposed code from core that I just committed yesterday. So what we get here is I've basically made like an image holder, which holds the image itself. And then there's a label for it. And then there's an input, which is hidden. And you'll see there's some classes. I'm using hide if JS. Like you can use hidden input, right? But I'm using hide if JS because if you don't have JavaScript, then you can't get to the media modal. So I've used the hide if JS class, which means that if JavaScript is on, this input won't show. If JavaScript is off, the placeholder won't show, and this input will show instead. Then the next piece is just the JavaScript. I would enqueue this as a separate file rather than just putting it in the head, but just on the add or edit screen. And basically what you do is there's a WP object that should be global to the window. We just make sure it's there or set it to an empty object so that we don't get errors later. And then we say when I click the select link, which is either an image or text, what do I do? So I set some variables. I look for whether or not this frame exists already, which is the really cool thing about the new media modal. Thickbox was an iframe. I don't know if you ever knew that. So that's why it was so slow, because every time you opened up Thickbox, it had to fire off a request and get the Thickbox back. And every single tab was another request. It wasn't like JavaScript-y switching or anything. So in this case, we save the frame, like the modal itself. Like we save the state of it. So if you come back and you click on the link later, it comes up instantly without firing off any new requests. So we look for if there's an existing frame or not. If there isn't, then we set up a frame. And then we grab what the title, what type of things should show up in the library, what the button should say. And these all come from HTML5 data attributes on the link itself. So that's where it grabs those things from. Is that way we can make it translatable. And then what happens is we add a callback to the select action. So once you've selected an image and you click the button to say select this image, what do we do? So we grab the URL of the image and the ID of the image. We put the ID in that input, and we put that image into the holder itself. So that once you've selected it, you get an actual preview of what that looks like. So in trunk, so I'm working in post formats again. So this is what it looks like in trunk. So if you select an image, right, it has to load the first time around, and I can select an image and send it in, and it inserts it into this placeholder just to look at, and then in the hidden input, it's got the ID of the attachment. So that's what we use later on. And again, see when I click it again, it pulls it up immediately because we've saved the state of that frame. So I actually find that to be a lot easier. There's no field guide about this, which I think is really unfortunate. I'm not going to be the one to write it because I don't know enough about it. But as you can see, there's a lot of really cool stuff that can be done with this new media modal and make it just really fast and easy for the user. Okay, another cool trick is putting a metabox for the static front page. So a lot of client sites, we end up assigning a static front page, right? Like especially sites that are using it more like a CMS instead of a blog. But sometimes home pages are very different from the rest of their content pages, right? It has a different template, different pieces of data. In this case, we had this really, really piecewise homepage. There's like a bunch of stuff in different places on the homepage. And I dislike the idea of having users put like HTML into the content editor to make it work. Like it makes me really unhappy. So I split everything out into meta. But because other pages have typical content, but the front page didn't. So what you can do is actually remove post type support for the editor in your metabox action. So when you're in your metabox callback, saying add the metabox, so you can check if the page you're currently editing is equal to the page on front. So it's just the ID. You compare the ID. You can add the metabox, and then you can remove post type support for the editor there, which sounds kind of hacky. But what's really funny is if you look in the file itself, which is edit form advanced in core, you'll see that the metabox actions run pretty much directly before it starts checking for post type support for these various things. So this is about as late as you can remove it, but you can, and it's not like a bad thing to do. So that's something really neat that we did for this site. This was before hooks were added outside of the metabox areas. So if I were to redo it today, this stuff would not be in a metabox like that. It would just be on the screen and have replaced what the content was. Okay, this is what I was showing you chosen for multi-selects and taxonomies. You can use it for any kind of multi-select, of course, any kind of data. In this case, I'm using it for taxonomies. There's a gist on GitHub. I recently updated it, I think like a month and a half ago. So now it actually takes care of everything basically for you, including like unsetting and setting. So core actually will set things for you, set taxonomy terms for you if you name your input correctly. Like you don't have to handle that in your save routine. Like it'll check all the capabilities and everything. So it's actually a really brief amount of code to make this work. Sometimes there's a better place for status-related meta. I see this sometimes where they've put it like into a meta box in the middle area or something. A really great place is here in the publish box. The publish box is kind of cluttered, so like be judicious about what you put there. But something like saying this is a featured item is a really, really good thing to have just in the publish meta box, because that's something that relates to the publishing action. They're thinking, okay, I'm getting ready to publish this thing. Oh, right, it's a featured thing, right? Its status is as a featured thing. Its status here is like you get draft and pending and public, right? But it's not the status that they're thinking of. They're thinking about the status is that it's featured. So we put it there because it's status related. The hook for that is called post submit box misc actions, miscellaneous actions. They appear after the default ones in core, but before the publish button. And you treat it just like any other meta box, add a nunce and all of that, so that you get, user intent and security and that sort of thing. You used to need inline styles before 3.4, but now that we are way past 3.5, I'm going to assume that you don't need them. So, some other things you can do is add default content. These first two are not placeholders. They're actual text that gets inserted, so into the title itself and into the content area. These are really useful if you have something that sort of is more like templated. Like if you have an event and the client is always going to want to input the title in a certain order, right? Like date first, then artist, then name of the event, and the content is always going to contain like ticket information and something first. But they don't want to do it in like separate fields. They just want to do it together. Adding default content would be kind of a cool thing to do there. So they just replace the default content with whatever they need, but it prompts them as to what they've come to expect there. The last one is a placeholder. So where it says, what does it say? Enter title here, and that is a placeholder. You can filter that text based on the post type. Okay, more things. These are the two hooks that allow you to add things outside of metaboxes. They're edit form after title and edit form after editor. They were added in 3.5, and there is a post on Make Core, which is a great place to monitor if you're into development, and especially like new stuff that's happening in Core. It's a post I wrote about using them. So they're pretty self-explanatory. They appear after where the title shows and after where the editor shows. And they actually appear whether or not your post type supports the title or editor, because there's no reason not to show them if you don't support it, because it's not actually tied together. Repeatable fields, I have a really, really rough gist up. I think it's bespoke code, so it's like ugly and not dry at all. But if you're curious about how that works, especially the save routine can be kind of tricky. Radio buttons can be really tricky with repeatable fields because of how they have to be named in the HTML. So you have to do some JavaScript juggling to make that work. And then, of course, there are other jQuery UI components that you can use. Like I was showing you there, the slider is a really great thing that you can use, and draggable sortable. Some plugins of note, like ones that I talked about, post to post is a great one, advanced custom fields, multiple post thumbnails. I put simple page ordering in there as an example of something that we install in the background a lot. It is a plugin by Jake Goldman, who's the owner of 10up. So there's that. That's part of why we like it. But it also allows clients to drag and drop pages in order, like on the list table itself. So they don't have to like go in and enter a number for the page order. So they can just drag and drop. Because we use that often, especially for something like a slide custom post type, allowing the client to reorder the slides from the list of slides in the backend. We use that plugin, and then we use menu order in the front to sort them. There are a couple of related presentations. One again is by Jake, What Would Core Do? It's just kind of an like overview of what other people have done, it's good and bad. And then there's Mike Schinkel's Mastering Custom Post Types, which dives more into just post types themselves and a little bit about post meta. So more in depth on those topics than I've been. Okay, so that's it. My slides are online there, and if you have any questions, it's a lot of code. Thank you.
Yeah, do you have any suggestions for UI or UX books to read, or is this just experience?
So the question is, do I have suggestions for UI, UX books to read? So I'm totally not like formally trained in this stuff at all. And yeah, a lot of it is just experience, and a lot of it is talking to users. Being married to a musician who likes to use WordPress to manage his stuff, but is kind of like, why doesn't it work? Right? Like he's my most favorite tester because he is super impatient and just wants things to work and hates it when it's complicated. Just experience. One of the things that I read relatively recently, it's a classic. It's The Design of Everyday Things. I mean, it's old, right? But he basically predicted the iPhone. Like the whole book is like him predicting the iPhone. But it's about how we interact with objects and what objects do or don't do that set our expectations of using them. So how, and this is what I think about a lot with Core, is how can I create an experience for the user that allows them to trust the interface, to trust the software? Because I think that's where people leave WordPress, where they leave using it, is that something happened to them that was bad and they don't trust it anymore. And so what can we do to continually improve Core so that users trust us again? Right, so in the case of post formats, I know we talked about it. It was like, I talked about it with one of your teammates, but we talked about like why it is that developers can't extend post formats. They're a set enumerated list, right? There are 9 post formats plus standard. you can't do anything to them. You can't add to them. And the reason for that is because it's supposed to be portable for the user. So the user should be able to trust that these post formats are going to be the same no matter what theme they're using. It's not true currently, which is bogus. And that's what we're trying to fix in 3.6 is to create actual user expectations. Give them the ability to trust that WordPress is going to save their data, present it to them in a way that makes sense, and allow them to change themes without penalty. So that's what a lot of that book is about. It talks about like, my favorite part is about light switch mapping. And once you've read it, you're going to hate light switches everywhere you go, ever. Because it talks about the fact that we use this up and down thing, and we're used to them like in a horizontal configuration, right? But are your lights ever horizontal, right? So like the middle one will turn on the lights back there, and the one over here turns on the lights like in the hallway, right? So light switch mapping was my favorite part, just like expectations of like placement and how it maps physically to what's at hand. That came up here is that we alter the edit form to reflect what's on the front because it maps for the user what their expectation is.
You said that the JavaScript UI was a part of the core of JavaScript. Do you have to enqueue it in your functions along with JavaScript, or is that included?
The question is about whether or not you have to re-enqueue stuff that's in core. So which example were you talking about? Might be this one, the image insertion. Yeah. So this is a custom piece of JavaScript because it's hooked to the field that I added. So it's custom JavaScript. The one thing that this does do that I should have mentioned is when you enqueue it, it has a dependency on media models, media-models.js, because it's relying on existing models for the frame. So that is one thing. But in the enqueue system, right, so you can set dependencies. So when I say it depends on media models.js, that means that when I call this script and it gets enqueued, if media models is not already present, which is extremely unlikely, but in the case that it's not present, it'll also enqueue that script so that everything comes together. But this is not in core. No.
I have a related question. I think in one of your screens you were saying how you kept referring to JavaScript being there, and I was wondering if you were loading some script native to your theme, and you just knew that these classes are ready to go in that particular flow you were talking about.
In this one?
Not in this specific one. In one of these, you were saying how the JavaScript would just be there, or the classes will just be there.
Inline.
I was wondering, I was like, are you loading that with the expectation that, or was it in the core of part of WordPress?
So I think you're talking about this, where it's just like inline.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is about like, can I expect that it's loaded and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I can because of jQuery ready, basically. So it waits until jQuery is ready for me to do this.
I think the screen I'm talking about, it didn't look like they were native to, it wasn't native to jQuery or WordPress. It looked like you had something specific going on.
The ugly thick box stuff.
Maybe it was a thick box.
So believe it or not, this is actually jQuery. It's using jQuery. It just doesn't look like it because we're not using like the jQuery signifier. But this is like find is a jQuery thing. So yeah, it makes some assumptions, but this will never ever happen unless we've clicked insert into editor, and in which case like jQuery is there. Like we would never have gotten to that point without jQuery. So there are some assumptions that are being made in that case.
So those functions up there, media center editor, and those are coming from core?
So the filter, yeah, so this, I don't think this exists anymore, but this is the old thing. Well, it does exist because Thickbox still exists. We can't just pull it out because some people use it directly. But yeah, so this filter, media center editor, basically what it does is it's what gets inserted when you click insert into post, or insert into post from the Thickbox. So what it does is it injects a script. It's like a really cheap way of doing it. And the reason why, like, again, it probably doesn't look like jQuery is because it doesn't do the document ready stuff, because I want it to run immediately. So I'm just injecting the script and allowing it to run when I click insert into post, which basically hijacks what usually happens. So it hijacks the usual insert into tiny MCE thing and says, quit it, don't bother doing that, and instead it puts it into the div and the input that I've specified in this code.
This is interesting because it hits it home for me, because in a site I just launched with 3.5, I'm doing something counter to it. I'm actually hijacking the standard gallery code on the front end. I'm completely ripping it out and rewriting it to style the gallery the way I want it to look, using the standard gallery output. So, for example, the editor is just using the regular drag and drop gallery for them, and they're just ordering the pictures the way they want. But on the front end, I'm completely taking that over and outputting it in a slider. Actually, it's a transition white thing, but this is like taking that to the next step where you're injecting little snippets of code right into the admin.
Yeah. Yeah. This is all manipulating admin stuff. Yeah, the front is great, right? Like you filter gallery output. So he's talking about like, taking the usual gallery output, which just like outputs like, I don't know, like a definition list or whatever it is on the front, but instead turning it into like a slider kind of thing. But yeah, so yeah, on the front we get lots of neat hooks, and especially because like so many theme authors like contribute to this kind of stuff in core, but not a lot of people really do this, surprisingly. So there's a lot of stuff that was missing. I think now it's much better with the new media modals, being able to use the frame and the models and JavaScript just to insert it all. But before, like you can see, it's a hot mess, right? And you're intercepting something that's being sent back from an iframe, like I mentioned, right? So thickbox is an iframe, so you're intercepting from an iframe, which is like the end of the world, which is why you have to execute JavaScript on insert, because you're coming from an iframe. So you have to pass this stuff. So you can see like it. What you have to do is you have to echo. Use PHP, right? So the reason why it's printed directly is because you have to use PHP to echo the ID and that kind of stuff, because it's coming from an iframe. So that's why it looks like that. And that's why we're really happy that it doesn't do that anymore. Anything else? Okay, thank you. Oh, we get talk.